Guys, I'm very happy. Today, I try to keep myself, as happy as possible. But I'm, really happy because I'm hosting, Mr. Swaroop Anand, one of the guys, to whom love interacting with, somebody who will actually guide you if you call him. And this is something, which is so enriching. We'll give you a little bit of introduction about Swaroop. Swaroop is a pass out from the prestigious ISB Hyderabad, and he's actually heading B2B sales for Wheelside right now. I welcome you, Swaroop, and thank you for taking out time on this Sunday evening.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rishikesh, for having me. I think it's always a pleasure having a chat, having a conversation, and we've had fun conversations, and this has been a long time coming. Like I was saying, I mean, we interacted a long time back, and then we've been pushing this talk, but yeah, there I durust hai, right?
Yeah. And the credit goes to me because I'm very good at follow-ups.
That's right.
Right. So we'll start with the thing which has been talked about a lot. People are working from home, especially talking from the perspective of the sales professionals, right? And it's being seen that a lot of attention is being given on the mental health part. Would you like to talk a little bit about how can sales professional make sure that they maintain a good mental health and actually, because that's so much important to do their profession well.
Yeah. So I think with respect to mental health, I mean, I'm going to keep it light because I'm not trained, I'm not a trained professional. And so I'm kind of going to keep it light, right? The good thing is that there is, a lot of awareness about mental health at this point in time, more than, anytime ever, right? All of us kind of know how important mental health is at this point in time. And there are a lot of conversations happening. There are a lot of avenues that people have to essentially seek help, with respect to their mental health. So that's the good part. The difficult part, or the concerning part, is that it's not talked enough. Right? I mean, we can always do better, and we can do much better. Coming to mental health in sales, guys, I think in sales people, in sales, rejection is a part of life, right? You face rejection every single day, probably more than any other function in the whole corporate world, right? You're gonna hear no a lot of times, much more than the other person in other function. So it's really important to basically know how to steer through that whole quagmire of hearing no, and getting rejection all the time, because it's not something that's natural, right? Even growing up, you don't face a lot of rejection all the time, right? From your parents, friends, so of course a few individuals kind of relate, or basically face it better. But for sales people, I think mental health is right up there, as something that they need to conquer. They need to kind of have a robust mental health. So when compared to the other functions, I mean, taking nothing away from the other functions, but probably you don't hear no as often as as a sales guy, right? So I think that there are a few things that you can basically do. Something that I have personally kind of done is meditate, right? I do not meditate as often as I would like to, but in really stressful times, I think meditation has helped quite a bit. What is meditation but just a tool to kind of clear your head, put things in perspective. Each one's meditation is different. I don't subscribe to a style of meditation or a particular app or something. It's just being with oneself. A few of them kind of do it in while taking a shower. You kind of, that is, so whatever kind of works for you, whether it's taking a walk, whether it's playing with a pet, a dog, a cat, a cockatoo for that matter, whatever could be a vent or release. But I think it's really important to kind of do that. Whatever you find therapeutic, it's, I think, really, really important to do that. And if you kind of think about it, one can carve out, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever, of the day to do that. However busy one might be, 30 minutes is all that you need. And I think that's really, really important. So meditation has worked for me in the past. But I'm kind of, I don't do it very, regularly. I've kind of gone to meditation whenever I've been very stressed. You see what I'm saying? But I think I need to kind of work to make that a constant in life. But it's helped me quite a bit. Yeah.
That's quite helpful actually. Meditation has actually helped me also.
Oh,
A little bit
lovely. So I'm
calm
preaching to the
myself.
choir then.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And you don't really need to do a lot of, research, thinking to kind of do it. You can just start with an app. It could be guided. It could be, it could be just something that you do on your own. But yeah, I think it's really helpful. Yeah.
And now physical health and mental health are a bit connected, right? And
Yeah.
since
Oh,
we
a lot connected, right? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No,
if
I
you'd
think
like to talk
with respect to
well.
physical health, right? So I've been an athlete in the past, and I think that's been my, uh, you know, uh, because I've been that, and my metabolism is thought about sorted. Uh, I quite frankly do not work out. Regularly I do not work out. Right. So it'll be a bit rich for me to kind of tell people here, you guys need to work out for 30 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever. But I'll tell you something that I've kind of worked on. One it will be very pompous of me to say, and that's about diet, right? It's about diet, especially in sales, guys, because sales people at least meals might be outside of home. It might not be a home cooked meal, right? I've heard a lot of my boys basically, when I've asked them what do they have for lunch, yeah, lunch kya khate? What did you have for lunch? Like do samosa at a thela, at a small restaurant, a puff here and there, कुछ बादाम मिल्क मिल गया तो वहाँ वो पी लिया. So I think diet is something that I'd probably talk a little more on rather than doing the hitting the gym workout bit, because practice what you preach, right? And so I think the things that have helped me in the past are at least have one meal which is a wholesome, usually that's breakfast, right? Because you don't go on sales calls really early in the morning. So at least one homemade meal to start the day off, probably something light during the day. And if you can wrap things up and come back and have another wholesome homemade meal for dinner, I think there's nothing like it, right? There are a lot of salespeople who essentially go to town on lunch eating out, right? Especially in the early years when you're in your early 20s, and mid and late 20s, your body is quite different from what it is in your 30s, right? In your early 30s. I might sound like a pretty old guy here, but I can see how the body changed, when you're in your early 20s and when you're in your early 30s. So I think, about diet, I think that's something that, I always say, yeah, have a wholesome, filling breakfast and then go out onto the field, to do the sales calls. Have a light lunch. Don't kind of abuse, care, samosa pe liye, puff kha liya, that kind of this thing, and then come back home to have a good dinner. Because I think that's, the most important thing rather than, uh, you know, going out and, and of course, when you're out in the field and you're essentially having meetings, you don't have a lot of time for lunch, right? You don't have a lot of time to essentially plan your lunch and, and it's also difficult to kind of carry lunch from home, into a client's, in between meetings, probably, having it in the car. A few of them do that. If you can, then great. But I haven't found it practical, jumping between meetings, having lunch in the car. So a wholesome meal at the start and at the end of the day is probably something that's better. And if you're, of course, there are a lot of people who do intermittent, right? Have only two meals. So then I think then, just compress that into 8 hours and, again, so that's something that has worked for me. A disclaimer, I think we should run that ticker saying this is not a, a certified medical professional. Please contact your, things like that. But yeah, it's something that's worked for me.
Right. So Swaroop, you actually reminded me of an incident that actually happened. So I was going for a client meeting and I was sitting in an Uber, and I actually opened my
Right.
tiffin box and I had, started having that Nutrilla with that roti. Okay, and it actually
Right.
made
Right.
a smell. The cab driver told me, "Sir, please, shut it down, or I am going to, just stop the cab. You have it outside." उसके बाद से मैं
Yeah.
cab कभी भी नहीं खाया.
Yeah, it's not very convenient now. It isn't very convenient. You can't kind of whip out your, tiffin dabba, your tiffin box in one of the client's offices. It's not very convenient. So I think, but of course, I think if again, it's similar to mental health, right? I mean, going to the gym, having a run, because I know, a lot of salespeople who do that, actually get up early in the morning, work out for an hour, run, jog, whatever for an hour, and it kind of helps them. Again, that is also therapeutic, right? I mean, it takes care of your mental health as well and helps you plan the day. So I've seen that these guys essentially, while they're doing their workout, while they're doing their, running, they're also planning the day. So they're kind of doing, you're getting both done in the same hour, so to say. So I think, that's something that, like I've talked about mental health, physical health also. Just taking 30 minutes out it's, I mean, if we tell ourselves that taking 30 minutes out to do this is difficult, then I guess we're kidding ourselves, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
And now, the question which, a lot of MBA aspirants will be interested in, and, even people, who are
Yeah.
not for an MBA as well, is that getting into ISB and doing an MBA from there is a dream for, most of the people across India. How was your
Right.
experience at ISB, and how is your hashtag life after ISB?
Yeah, so that's the status that I have on WhatsApp that Rishikesh is talking about. See, hands down, the best year of my life. The year at ISB was hands down the best year. I met some amazing people. Gained a lot, got a lot of perspective, met amazing people. Met my wife there, so I think hands down, yeah, hands down the best year. So I think MBA did a lot of good things, to life. I think my three biggest takeaways are: number one, the kind of peer group that you get into, right? The kind of perspectives that you get from the peer group. I think that is something that is not matched by anything else. That I've ever before that or after that. That kind of perspective that I've got. That was just something else. Um, in my section, there were people who were there were medical doctors. There were economists, there were lawyers, there was a para commando, and Indian Army Special Forces, commando. So the kind of experiences that the perspective that you get from their experiences, that I think is just brilliant, right? I had entrepreneurs, among my close friends were entrepreneurs who kind of started, businesses, and that business had flourished, and they were as old as I was, right? I was 25 when I entered ISB. And so the kind of perspective, the peer group and the perspective that I got from these guys was brilliant. The second thing is with respect to the the kind of, it broadens your horizon because you start thinking big. Before that, before, at least I'll speak for myself. Before I went to ISB, I was probably limited by my own kind of thinking, right? It really broadened my horizon, and I started thinking big. That kind of happened after going to ISB, right? Again, it could be partly because of the kind of profs who talked, the professors who talked about the different topics that we learned, or it could be because of the peer group, right? Either way, I think it really broadened my horizon, right? And number three, and most the network, I think, is something that is, I think the biggest asset that one can take from business school, right? The kind of, people before your class, after your class, senior, junior, there's no senior, junior concept in ISB because it's a 1-year course, but in other B schools, of course, the kind of network that you essentially get into, I think that is just brilliant, right? And and that network is only going to be growing every year because more and more people are going to be graduating from your alma mater, and So I think these are the three big takeaways for me from my MBA experience. And whoever kind of asked me this question, right? Kiar, I'm unsure, should I do an MBA or not? I just tell them to go for it, right? If of course they're, what they want to do in life is essentially to build something, on their own, or help somebody build a business or whatever that is. So I kind of ask people to go for it, because people kind of go do their MBA because they want a pay raise, they want a title bump, they want to change, functions, they want to change sectors. These things will happen, right? Those things will happen. I feel that, those are by basically the byproduct of doing it. वो तो होगा ही होगा, but you will earn far more important and enriching things by doing an MBA from a good school, right? I think okay, that should be a qualifying statement, from a good school, because you essentially are in a position to leverage these three things that I spoke about in a good school. So I think, but personally for me, hands down, the best year of my life. The kind of people I met were just brilliant, man.
And how has been your life after ISB?
So I think it's been, like I said, all of these three things, right? The kind of network that I got into has helped me in each of the jobs, right, that I've done after ISB. It has resulted in, very happy married life. That also is, thanks to ISB, and from the perspective of thinking big, right? Like I said, like before that, I was essentially a sales guy in an automobile company with Ashok Leyland, and my horizon was pretty limited, right? I was essentially limited by my thinking, but that kind of, really kind of grew multifold post ISB. So life after ISB has been challenging. It has been, of course, there are ups and downs, right? You like a few roles, you don't like a few roles. Some roles are more stressful than the others, but all in all, I think at least you get into that, thought process that you kind of look at what your key takeaways are. I think that's the kind of thinking that an MBA kind of gives you, right? What are the key takeaways from this? I know I'm having a difficult time. It's a very stressful job. It's a, but what are the takeaways that I can basically leverage? I think that's really important. So, so whoever is essentially in that dilemma, should I do an MBA? Should I look at an MBA? If you ask me, you don't even have to call me. I'm going to tell you here, yes, I think you should do it. And of course, you need to do it from a good school, because that's essentially how you kind of leverage these 3 points that I spoke about the most, right? Because ISB essentially was set up, to conform to the global standards. So it's not an Indian school, it doesn't feel like an Indian school, because, all of us have done our undergrad from an Indian school, right? So it doesn't, the smell, sight, smell, touch is not that of an Indian school, and that's something that you kind of, bring, that's how that will help. So, doing it from a premier school. Yeah.
Absolutely, very helpful. The next question is about cold calling, right? You must have done a lot of calling. Any tricks, any suggestions, for people who do a lot of cold calling and who feel that, it's so demotivating.
Right. So I think something I tell sales people a lot, right? See, it's a sales funnel. It's a sales funnel, which means it's broad at the top and then narrow at the bottom. Not a barrel, which means you have everybody that you call, or everybody that you essentially, when I say call, it's not necessarily a telephonic call. It could be a video call. It could be a face-to-face meeting. Everybody's not going to close, right? Which means that, you're set up to the fundamental setup is that 70% or 80% or 90% or 50%, depending on your offering and the people that you're meeting, are going to say no, right? Cold calling is essentially to increase the top of the funnel, right? Which is to essentially bring in as many leads as possible, touch as many people as possible, so that your top of the funnel goes larger. So you're essentially casting your net, in fishing parlance, you're casting your net, it's a larger net that you're casting. Right? In terms of cold calling, I definitely believe that, the term cold calling is, at least the way I see it, is going in blind, right? Without having any kind of, not knowing that person, just going in blind and, reading of a sales script and doing your best that you can do using that sales script. I believe that it needs to be warmer. The warmer that call is, probably the probability essentially is increasing, closure probability, right? So you need to warm that cold call as much as you can, as much as one can, right? So probably do a warm call rather than a cold call is what I'm basically saying. And how do you essentially do that? Is by doing as much homework as possible, right? You can basically sit and do one after the other calls, uh, which essentially means you're casting it wider and wider and wider, the net, right? But it doesn't necessarily ensure that fish, you actually catch fish, right? So, so I think as much homework as possible, but I think the hygiene is try to make it as personalized as possible. I think as personalized as possible, because you don't want to say dear customer, you probably want to use the person's name, right? You want to know what that company does, what you want to know what that person does in that company, right? As much as one can before you kind of go out, doing that cold call is, so make it as warmer as possible, right? You obviously wouldn't know everything about that person, everything about that company, because you are essentially, it's the information that you get is limited by what you find on the internet or from, the lead list that you're getting, right? But try to make it as warm as possible. I think that's something that I always tell the guys is, try to make it as personalized as possible, at least the name, what they do, and more importantly, after, you kind of touch base with that person, try to understand what it is that they're looking at, right? Or else, it's akin to, shooting in the dark, right? Try to essentially understand, get a picture of what is it that is the context, what is the background, so that you can at least, you kind of do it in the right direction, right? That's basically the thing. So my tip about cold calling is to make it as warm as possible, to make it as warm as possible, and that's going to come by doing a lot of homework, as much as one can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So helpful, so I usually think like कि अगर मैं 10 लोगों से बात कर रहा हूँ and
Yeah.
So 8 people I'm not gonna like if I'm doing a personal conversation, but then there are
Yeah.
2 people at the end of the tunnel जिनको मैं तभी पहुंच सकता हूँ जब इन 8 लोगों को break कर सकूँ.
Yeah, that's true. And you kind of learn with each conversation. Hopefully, if you're a good sales guy, you kind of learn from that. Learn from each of the rejections. But no, yeah. So I think वो लेके चलो. Fundamental वो होना चाहिए कि यार a majority are going to say no, right? A majority of the people are going to say no, and you should be okay with that, right? Because that's the nobody has a conversion percentage of 100%. Right? There's always a percentage, that's less than that. So yeah, I think make it as warm as possible. If I had to kind of condense it into one sentence.
And now one of the things which very less people do they actually talk about is about the listening skills. People think that sales is about pitching your product, sales is about talking a lot, but I felt and since we already had a conversation. And I have felt is that, the number of times I have had conversation with people, if I have, actually listened them well, like, it's like 70-30 ka ratio, 70% of the times I'm actually listening, I actually ended up making a great relationship with them.
Yeah.
And listening skills is something, which I will, really want to take your points on, because I really feel that you have got great listening skills.
Thanks so much. But, I think, I think they're underrated. I think listening skills are underrated. People don't kind of, because the thing that you have in mind when you think of a good sales guy, it's somebody who can kind of charm you, who can essentially, who's very likable, has a lot of charm, kind of, gets you hooked, right? And kind of uses flowery language or whatever. But I think, the successful salespeople, right? Essentially, while they are listening, they're essentially making a playbook, right? A strategy to do all of these things, right? So I think it's very underrated. The what I've basically felt, I think you spoke about your own personal, the data is essentially your personal data, right? That wherever you've heard or listened more to the customer, you have made a sale. So I think it's very underrated. We immediately kind of jump onto, right, okay, so this is how my product is, and kind of get into that whole groove, right? But a lot of times, customers will tell you exactly what they want most of the time, right? You don't even have to kind of read through the lines and things like that, right? They will tell you exactly what they want most of the time. There are going to be people who are probably going to be guarded in their communication at the start or things like that. But I think essentially most of them will tell you what they want. So that's one aspect of kind of having listening skills, right? Which is of course directly from the customers. I think the second part is outside, that deal table, listening from the other people, right? And essentially trying to understand, while sitting. So I always have a thumb rule whenever I'm waiting for a meeting. I don't kind of check my phone, look at other calls, do other calls and things like that. I try to essentially look at what the surroundings are, right? To essentially see what are the cues that I can get. That also I'll kind of put it into listening, because you're essentially listening with your mind, with your eyes and things like that, right? Essentially all of this helps you create a good strategy, a good plan, to increase the probability of success. Because that's essentially what people are doing, right? So one is of course while sitting with the customer, listening. I think you need to essentially do, because he will tell you, he or she will tell you what they need, right? And the second thing, of course, is to essentially understand outside of, before, after, essentially listen to what to all the cues that you can use to make your plan, right? So I think that is something. So it's very underrated. I think personally, while I haven't kind of done a lot of introspection with respect to data, but I think listening has basically helped quite a bit. I remember when we had our conversation, right? Like you said, I was doing the listening most of the time because I wanted to understand you as a person, right? I wanted to understand you as a person before we got into this endeavor. And that would come only when I heard and not kind of started talking about my life and gave you gyan. I wouldn't really know you as a person, right? So I think that's really important. And the other thing is, I think not just for that sale, right? I think the other part to it is not just for that sale. You want to listen to make a relationship with that person, because chances are that you are going to have a long-term relationship with that person, unless it's a very short sales cycle, kind of offering. Chances are that you kind of going to have a relationship with that. This is especially important in the enterprise sales, side of things, right? Where it's not a one-time kind of conversation. Essentially, it's going to be a repeated conversation stretched over months, maybe years, depending on what you're essentially selling. So, getting all of that, listening is going to give you an insight about that person, to help you build a relationship with that person. So I think that's the other part of listening, which kind of transcends, just that sale. वो sale करने के लिए तो it's important to kind of hear, but even after that, it's really important. So yeah, those are basically my thoughts with respect to listening. And you've done a good job so far. Over the last 3 minutes, you've been listening quite well. So I'm gonna be doing that now.
Life takes a circle, Swaroop, right? You listen to me that way, I'm listening to you now.
Right.
And now we will get into something about logistics as an industry, right? And
Yeah.
who better than you can actually talk about some of the problems and some of the
Yeah.
pain points which logistic industry is facing right now.
Right. See, I think one thing about the logistic industry is that it has not seen a lot of penetration of technology. And that basically means that there's huge opportunity there, right? Uh, Technology penetration in the logistics sector has basically happened very little, and it's not necessarily, and it's not happened a lot with respect to actually the business part of things. It's happened in communication, it's happened in entertainment and things like that. It's not happened in, basically increasing efficiency, increasing productivity, not a lot. So I think that way, and the industry is, uh, a significant chunk. If you look at the larger GDP of the nation, it's a pretty important chunk. And uh, you know, technology largely, when it kind of penetrates into an industry, helps in increasing efficiency and productivity and things like that. Right? So I think right now, so I keep saying this to people, right? So today has probably been the day when the most amount of penetration of technology has happened in logistics. And tomorrow it will be more than today, because the idea is that every single day is going to be the day that it has been the largest. So that's essentially the curve that's happening. And that is very exciting, to be in. It's an exciting space to be in because, again, at the risk of sounding very jargony, that paradigm shift is going to come from that, from the use of that technology, right? So I think largely it hasn't changed. Largely the sector hasn't changed over the last 50 years, right? Or the last 40 years. It hasn't changed by a lot. But the good thing is that now there's been enough, the penetration of internet, the penetration of technology is essentially increasing. Um, so it's a huge opportunity. It's exciting because uh, we are at essentially the start of the penetration of technology in this space, which means that the biggest gains that can be made is now, right? So I think that way, I think logistics and the fact that it's a big part of the economy. We have a very clear mandate from, I mean, at least from the government's perspective, the road transportation, the highways, that's among the, I'd say, among the best performing ministries, of the government. And so I think the vision is very clear from the government as well. And, I think it's a very exciting space to be in. Unfortunately, there's not been a lot of change over the last so many years. But again, fortunately, penetration is increasing. Technology penetration is increasing, which makes it, like I said, very exciting. As a space, as an industry. Yeah.
And the skill set of the people, especially working at the ground level, right?
Yeah.
They're not that skillful, right? And don't you think it gets very difficult to manage people who are on ground, operating, especially the drivers, the people who manage transport? Your
Yeah.
viewpoint.
No, so yeah, of course. I mean, that's something that. So I think the prime mover there is going to be education, right? The kind of uh, shift that's going to happen there is going to be through education. Unfortunately, it's going to take time. It's not going to happen like that. It's going to take time. It's going to take a few years, maybe a decade, maybe two, to essentially shift that, right? I think that is definitely a challenge. But again, like I said, skill upgradation, skill set upgradation is essentially going to be accelerated by the use of technology, right? So I think that I'm a big believer in that here. That skill upgradation is going to happen through technology, and like it is, of course, starting to happen, right? So one of two ways, right? Either through education, which is probably it's going to take time, or through tech, which is essentially going to be helping in upgrading that skill. But yeah, I mean, that is something that is a challenge even now in the logistics sector, like you mentioned.
It's a big time
Yeah.
headache, so
Yeah. I'm sure in your, in our current jobs, we kind of face that. But like I said, I mean, I try to be optimistic in the sense that we kind of look at how much better it can become. But yeah, and it is quite the challenge. Yes.
And now, so we'll leave the industry aside. We'll not go more into that,
Right.
and we'll start talking about the hiring part. Especially when you're actually hiring for your team and you're building your team, especially in a startups case. Where
Yeah.
we have to go there and we have to hire people and we have to set up a team. It becomes quite difficult, right? To make sure that we are having the right talent at the right place.
Yeah.
uh, your viewpoints on actually hiring, especially the sales team for B2B thing,
Yeah.
and from the context of startups.
Right. Um. So I think uh, so I have a very clear kind of thought process there. There are three things that I look at. When I'm basically hiring somebody, I'm looking at three things, and this is largely those three things only. Um, the How much they know about the industry is not something that is on my list. Okay, that is not something that is on my list at all. Which is why even in my current role, the kind of people that I've hired, there are there's a very small percentage who have come from that same industry, right? And not because there are not too many people doing it. It's not because of that, right? There are people who have been doing it. So I don't look at the kind of industry that they come from. I look at three things. Number one is communication, right? Communication is something that is most important because you need to basically communicate about your offering, your product, your service, or whatever. Communication is the number one thing, which is something that I look at. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that they need to have a great command over the English language. They need to have flowery, glossy stuff. It's that they should be able to communicate very well in the language that the customer wants to hear. Right? That could be English. If it is essentially enterprise sales, if it is big ticket enterprise sales, if it is where you're essentially selling to C-suite guys, it probably is English, where you need to have a good command. But I basically say that they need to have a great communication skills to speak in the language that the customer wants to hear, right? Or the customer speaks. There's another level to this, right? It's a little deeper than just, when I say language, I just don't mean vernacular. I don't mean here, okay, this person is from, Tamil Nadu, so Tamil aana chahiye. That's not the thought process. This person is from Gujarat and Gujarati, they need to know. It's not about that. It's essentially to understand, how to communicate to the customer using they should pick up the jargon, they should pick up the non-verbal cues as well. What is it, when is it that I need to basically communicate with them, what time is the right time to communicate with them, things like this comes with time, but they would have essentially picked up in their previous job, right? At least a geographical kind of setting. So communication, I think, is the most important. And again, the disclaimers are that it's not, communication does not equal to English, and communication essentially means in the language that the customer wants to hear. So they need to be really pukka on that. So that's the first thing that I look at. The second thing that I look at is what is their street smart? How street smart they are, right? What is the smarts that they have? Street smarts, I think, it's an umbrella term, right? It's not necessarily, I mean, you don't have like a psychometric test to kind of, measure how street smart a person is. But essentially to understand, how they have done in the past, how have they cracked deals, what, so street smarts are, I think, the second thing, which I think is, if I kind of talk about what that essentially means is how to get the sale, right? What are the kind of initiatives, what are the thought processes, how nimble they are to kind of move around to see how I close this deal. That's what I mean by street smart, right? It could be things like befriending, befriending a person in the office, the client that you're essentially going to sell, befriending somebody there to essentially understand information that anybody else wouldn't know, and using information from there. So that is street smart, right? That's an example of street smart. Essentially talking to, the people at the reception, people at the security staff, essentially to understand and get insights which would help them close the sale, right? That's street smart, right? Keeping their eyes and ears open at any point in time, that's street smart, right? All of these are example of street smart. I think essentially it is how nimble they are and what essentially they can basically do to get the deal closed, right? Ethically, right? Because that's the this thing. So I think that's the second thing that which is the street smarts, right? The third thing I look at is how likable they are, right? How likable that person is, how that person comes across in any conversation, right? Not necessarily in an interview, because interview becomes formal and people kind of how likable they are, because I think it's common knowledge that you kind of buy more from the person that you like, right? So if that person in the conversation with me, as if I'm basically hiring for a role, if that person doesn't come across as likable, right? Chances are that the client is also not going to find that, and that means that chances are that probability of success is going to be lesser. So that's basically the thought process. So that's the third thing that I look at, how likable they are. Again, I think disclaimers to that. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that they kind of are very flattering. They kind of flatter or talk this person up, talk me up or things like that. But generally, you kind of get a vibe, right? You get a vibe from a person here. You get a vibe from that person. So they need to be likable, right? Primarily because if I find them likable and they essentially are putting effort, putting in effort to be a likable person, they're going to be doing that with the client or the customer as well. And that essentially increases the probability of success. So these three things: communication, street smart, and the third thing is how likable they are. These are basically the three things that I look at. Which industry that they come from, that's not something that I'm very, particular about. Sometimes I feel that people who come from the same industry probably come with baggage, which makes it difficult, So you need to kind of unlearn and relearn, because you might have a different culture of doing things, and you don't want that kind of culture to do it. It is, it's easier kind of. A lot of people take that route, get people from the competitor, right? And I've also done that in the past, but I've seen that that's not worked quite a bit, right? And it's I think you're trying to essentially optimize for the short term by getting somebody from the competition, because they kind of come with the context of their customers. You can now become your customers. But I think that's a very short term hack which doesn't make sense in the long term, because that baggage most times is something that brings about negativity. So I think these three things, again reiterating, right? So the communication bit, street smart, and the how likable they are.
So communication is skill, street smart, and likability. Guys, take care of these three things, because they are the most important things.
Right.
And Swaroop is also heading B2B sales for Wheel Size Guys. So the LinkedIn profile description. So if you're interested, ping him, and take care of these three things, guys. Because if you talk about your industry, because likewise what Swaroop told, I actually actually resonate with the same thinking. Like, people from the same industry carry a lot of baggage. Like, they are like, मैंने ये किया था, अब मैं यहाँ पे भी वही करूँगा.
Correct.
And now, Swaroop, so I will get into a little bit into your personal life, and I will, want you to talk a little bit about some of the failures that you actually faced in your life, failures or setbacks, whatever you say that. And what was your mantra of, coming out of that?
I think that's a good question. Let me kind of put my thoughts, in place. So, I think there have been more than an occasion that has kind of, faced failure in professional life, right? Because in sales, not every month, not every whatever that time period is. The operating time period depends basically on the industry that you are. It could be weekly target, it could be monthly target, it could be quarterly, annually, whatever. So not every quarter or not every month is going to be, it's going to be great, right? So you are going to have time periods when it's going to be a lull, right? You're not going to be doing well. So I think it is this kind of happened early in my career as well. I mean, frankly, my first job when I was selling trucks, it started then. And of course, I mean, you have lows, in sales. I mean, you do that. I mean, you kind of have that. I think it's really important to kind of, step back to understand, because it's very easy to kind of get whipped, get carried away by the emotions of it. Yeah, I was not able to do my target, and essentially, if it is not an individual contributor role, if you're essentially handling a team, you kind of start natural thing is to you kind of start blaming it on your particular team members, right? Here, this particular team or this particular region has essentially not done it. So I think a lot of introspection is important. Why was that something? Why did that month or that quarter not do well? I think
We lost you somewhere, Swaroop, I think.
Rishikesh, can you?
Yeah,
Hey,
we
hi.
lost. So we heard, we were actually on, the setbacks, and you were talking
Yeah,
about,
yeah,
part of your life, you need to step back and see, like, why did
yeah.
you actually fail? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I think it's about introspection because you have all the answers. If you failed, you have all the answers. It's only about introspecting. Essentially, not get carried away in emotions. And that's basically what I've done here. Gone back, introspected why have these things happened, and then kind of use that, use the learnings from that introspection to kind of come up with a better, a better kind of game plan, right? So I think that's I think that's something that I've done in the past. Stepping back and introspection, again, it's easier said than done, right? Any jam is easier said than done. It's about how you kind of execute that, how do you put into practice. But stepping back, and I really believe that each person, whether it's an individual contributor or a leader in sales, when they face failure, they have all the answers most of the time, right? So introspection is going to help quite a bit, or it can help you, it kind of can nudge you in a direction to seek help if you do not have the answer. The majority of the times you have the answers to the solutions is my opinion. Yeah.
Got it. And now,
Yeah.
there has been a lot of results, MBA results, which have come out in the last couple of months, and
Right.
a lot of people, may not have been able to crack, the so-called Premier B schools in India. Your
Right.
suggestions to them, do should they feel disheartened, or is there a way out, right? They should not keep on thinking on their failures.
Right. So I think the easier thing to say is, something on the lines of don't get disheartened, failure is a stepping stone to success. But the way I look at it is, you need to get, I mean, if you get disheartened, it's fine. And I would rather you get disheartened and use it. That's basically my thought process. Yeah, if you get disheartened, and you will, I mean, and again, yeah, use it to get better. Use it to essentially understand where it is that you need to kind of work on. That I think is the most important thing. So I wouldn't say we are, all of these things, right? Okay, don't get disheartened and things like that. I I've always said, use that. Use the fact that you don't like where you are, which is not cracking it, to get essentially better at what you've been working towards, right? That's something that I'd probably do, rather than kind of say, soften the blow by saying, don't get disheartened and things like that. So that's basically my this thing. Use it to get better. Use it to kind of get into a direction where you can do better. That's basically my. I've been hard on myself also. I mean, again, it's not that I've kind of cracked everything. I've been very, not even face failures. That's something that I have used. Can use it to kind of fuel your, um, your path to the goal that you want to essentially achieve. Right. That's something that I have used in the past. Yeah. So
Very
if you haven't cracked it, please use it. Please see how you're feeling bad at this point in time, and use that to get where you want to go the next time.
yeah. And a small amount of gyan, failures can actually do two things. It can break you or break all the records.
Lovely. I don't know where I've heard or read this. Where is this from?
From somewhere, I don't know. My father told this while I was like, 5 years old.
Oh, wow. Oh, brilliant. No, I think, very profound things you kind of, get from your parents, and it kind of sticks for some reason, right? I'm not sure why you even remember this, if this is told to you when you are 5 years old. But if it has stuck, then it obviously has struck a chord with you, right? That's what it basically means. Yeah.
And one common thing that I've actually seen or heard after talking to you or the other guys is that uh, the, everybody has gone through a phase of failure,
Yeah. Yeah.
and everybody was frustrated at some point of time. Everybody
Yeah.
was thinking that whether they can achieve or not. But there's been one thing like which you told actually, so Swaroop, they actually took a step back and just thought,
Yeah.
"Ki, why did I actually fail,
Yeah.
and why did I achieve this
Yeah.
setback?" That's the differentiating thing, I think.
Yeah, I think that's basically how one should deal with failure. Taking a step back, introspecting, and kind of coming back with a better plan, right? Here, how are we essentially going to achieve our goal the next time around?
And now the last question is that you're working for a startup, and you're working inside the logistics industry, and the CEO came to you and told that you have to set up business in some other geography. Let's suppose you're working in India, and he came to you and he told that, "Ki, Swaroop, you have to establish the market in let's suppose Southeast Asia, like what will be your approach to that?" And this question is for all the people who want to understand the go to market strategy for these new geographies, from your perspective.
Right. So I think I'm not going to kind of. So I think largely, if I talk about the kind of GTM, it basically depends on which sector you're in and what kind of sales you're essentially doing. What is it that you're selling, whom you're selling to, and things like that. At one end is a small ticket offering, right? Small ticket means it's quite inexpensive, or rather, the ticket is small. And if the ticket is small, the sales cycle is pretty short, right? On the other side of the spectrum, on the diametrically opposite side, or on the far end of the spectrum, is enterprise sales, which is large ticket size, and it's not a volume game; it's a value game, right? So you don't basically close a lot of deals in a year, but each deal kind of brings you hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? It's essentially in the lakhs and the crores. And like I said, on this side is the small ticket size. Essentially, it's a volume game. You need to essentially sell a lot of units to do that, right? So, um, so it basically depends, and of course, there are things in between these two called middle market, right? And that is essentially what the name suggests. They are between these two, and it's not essentially a value game because it's not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's lesser, so you need to kind of do much more than what you are doing in large sales. So I think the GTM for all of these three is going to be different, right? The kind of people who are going to be selling these offerings are going to be different, because essentially they need to mirror the people who are buying it, right? That's essentially the thing, right? So if it is a large enterprise, I mean, you're essentially doing enterprise sales, which is a large ticket size. What that essentially would mean is that you don't need a lot of people on the field, right? You don't need a lot of people. Your feet on street is not going to be a large team, right? Because you're going to be having a few people, but those guys are going to be really experienced guys. They're going to be essentially people who have been doing enterprise sales, usually have been doing enterprise sales for a long time, because they can leverage the C-suite selling skills, or they can leverage their own network, right? So that's something that's going to be most important. But they are going to be held by a pre-sales team and a post-sales team, right? I'm basically talking about these large. It could be a large software, for a firm that you're essentially selling, and the deal size could be in the lakhs or in the crores, right? For a large enterprise. On the other side, if it's going to be a small ticket size, product or offering, product or service, it's going to be a large field team, a large team, essentially feet on street or telesales, depending on what that mode could be. Basically that's going to be the model, right? So, and mid market is going to be between these two, right? So essentially it depends on what you're selling, which part of the spectrum that you're in. That's going to decide how you're going to sell, right? And how many people are going to sell, right? Large software, you don't need a lot of people. You need, savvy, BDRs, or you need savvy sales managers who are going to be, it's going to be a flat structure. There are not going to be too many layers, who are going to be essentially doing it. So it totally depends on which part of the spectrum that you are in, right? That's number one. And I think the second thing is, of course, in terms of the geographical, the second thing is, of course, the geography, because you kind of pose your question from the perspective that it's outside of India. So you need to basically know that kind of geography. There's more often than not local people, essentially people from that ethnicity, from that country, essentially are going to be the ones that you're going to be hiring, for more reasons than one. It could be regulatory, it could be others, but most probably you're going to be hiring people from that country, so to say, or from that region. If it's, of course, within India, then of course our own complex diversity comes into the picture with respect to the languages that we speak and things like that. But largely, I think from the GTM perspective, it's going to be which part of the puzzle that you're essentially going to be solving, how large that team is going to be. If it's going to be a large team, which is at this end of the spectrum, then there's going to be multiple layers, because you need managers, and span of control is not going to be greater than 10, in the sense that there's not going to be one person who will be able to handle more than 10 people and do a good job at it, right? So for every 10 people, you kind of need a team leader, supervisor, manager, or whatever, and then that kind of goes on that. So that's going to be the kind of setting here. Here it could be just individual sales guys, but individual contributors who probably have been doing this for 8 years, 10 years, 12 years, and they kind of report into directly the VP. There's going to be just one guy and less than 10 people running a full country, right? So that, I think, is basically about the GTM. It totally depends on which part of this whole spectrum that one sits in. And the second part is, of course, with respect to the geography, right? You need to kind of have to build this thing. Generally, you don't need a pre-sales team, with a large field force. Where you need a pre-sales team is when you do not, when you have a lot of leads essentially to sift through, to essentially help get the appointments for the field team, because there's so many leads. जो usually नहीं होता है, people are really dying for leads, but जहाँ पे, if in the case that you have a lot of leads, then you have you have a team to essentially sift through and give the most potent leads to the field sales team. And in the large enterprise sales, there you have a proper pre-sales and post-sales, because it's going to be a large, it's a long sales cycle wherein you kind of do presentations after presentations and meetings after meetings in multiple settings. So there's a many to many relationship that's essentially being built. Many to many in the sense there are multiple functions of this organization selling to multiple functions of the other organization. And when I mean multiple functions, it's going to be that it's not just the purchase guy who's going to be making that decision. It's the tech guys, the tech functions thoughts are going to be taken into account. The finance, the legal, everybody is going to be essentially be taken into account. Right? So that is basically. So GTM, we can probably have another session of another 2 hours about GTM because it's so complex. But largely, it is which part of the spectrum that one is in.
Got it. Was very helpful actually, and sort of one last question,
Sure.
Is it really required to do an MBA, right? To actually lead team or to actually acquire a leadership place?
No, you don't essentially need to do an MBA to become a leader, right? It is basically going to help you. An MBA is going to help you be a good leader. And again, the other 3 things that I spoke about, right? What an MBA gives you. So the answer, the short answer is no. You don't need an MBA to become a leader. Not all MBAs, that we see, even from Premier B schools, are all leaders. They're not all managers. There are a lot of people who are, an individual contributor, and they like being an individual contributor. So I guess it depends essentially on the kind of person that you are. If leadership is something that you want to, it comes naturally to you. It's something that you essentially want to do and things like that. But an MBA will basically help you get there because it brings you a lot of perspective, right? Like I said, the 3 takeaways that I spoke of: network, right? You essentially, get a lot of people in your network who can help you with different problems, right? You get different perspectives, and perspectives, I think, basically putting yourself in the other person's shoes is something that's really important for a manager, right? For a leader, somebody who's leading a team. And, essentially that thinking big, not being limited, all of that, that also essentially helps a leader be a good leader, because if they don't have that, they are limiting themselves and their teams, right? By not thinking big. So while it doesn't, an MBA will basically help you get there. And again, coming back to the first this thing, right? If at all you want to kind of go for it, because it kind of helps you quite a bit. That's unless you want to kind of go into the technical side of things, or you want to go the non-profit side of things. I mean, quite a few of my classmates from ISB are also in the non-profit space. So it's not again necessarily limited to only the for-profit space, but yeah, it kind of helps the one in their journey if they want to kind of lead people.
I really spent my 1 hour. It's one of the most productive 1 hour.
I'm glad.
Pleasure, conversing with you. And guys, you can always reach out to him. I pasted his LinkedIn profile, in the description section. Feel free to, ping him. I hope, a lot of you will benefit from that as well. And Swaroop, thank you for taking out time, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. It was good, fun having this conversation. I think, I'm really kind of happy to help, people with their queries. And I kind of, really enjoyed this. So thanks so much for this talk as well. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Swaroop.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.